Hi everyone, I'm really excited to be here today at Write the Docs 2021, and I am here to talk about building a style guide from the ground up and some lessons I learned from the experience as a lone writer. My name is Deanna Thompson. I am a technical writer at Tech Elevator, and Tech Elevator is a 14-week coding bootcamp and career prep program where we teach folks with a variety of backgrounds to become software developers and land fulfilling careers in tech. And I've been enrolled for about a year and a half now, 2 years in August. I am a Docs code enthusiast, and you can find me on Twitter at itsDeannaT. Before I get into the meat of this presentation, I want to tell you a bit about the team that I work on and the work that we do. I'm a member of the curriculum development team. Essentially what we do is we develop learning materials for our students and instructors. For our students, we develop exercises, tutorials, and quizzes. We also provide them with reading material, and we provide lecture notes for our instructors to use in the classroom. In addition to myself, usually on the team there are about 3 to 4 software developers. We do work in a Docs code environment, so we use Git, Markdown, and ViewPress for our documentation. And when I joined the team about a year and a half ago, they were using the Google Developer Documentation Style Guide for their documentation. If you've never seen Google Style Guide before, this is what it looks like. There's a screenshot here. This document in the middle talks about this guide and how to use it. On the left-hand side of the page is a sidebar that tells you, or rather it lists out the topics that are included in the style guide. This is a great style guide. It's very comprehensive and it covers a lot from, writing for accessible needs to writing for a global audience, language and grammar, using code and text, formatting UI elements, images, and more. If you don't have a style guide, this is a great choice to pick. And we used this for about a year or so, and it worked fine for us. But as time went on and as I began to learn more about our product and about the team and our brand, I had a few questions. I noticed there were some things that were missing from Google Style Guide that we needed. Some of the questions that I had were, where was guidance around our brand voice and how we use it in our documentation? Google Style Guide does provide some general guidance about voice and tone, but what about Tech Elevator's voice? How do I know what company-specific terminology to use? There were some terms that we used that weren't included in Google's word list. When do I use callouts? How are they defined, and how do I create them? What's the difference between warning and a dangerous warning? And how do I create them? There's a specific way to do that in ViewPress. And then what are some guidelines writers should follow when writing curriculum materials? We all sort of intuitively knew how to write a tutorial versus an exercise, but that information wasn't documented anywhere. Essentially, the problem was that our needs differed from Google's defaults. I couldn't find the answers to that question, or many of those questions rather, in Google's style guide, but because it wasn't documented anywhere else, our documentation remained inconsistent at times. So the plan then was to do just that, to create a customized style guide that could answer those questions. I wanted this style guide to be something that could serve as a complement to Google Style Guide. I wasn't looking to reinvent the wheel, especially when Google Style Guide is so comprehensive, it has a lot of information. I wanted something that could just address those areas where Google's didn't provide guidance. And I also wanted to create a style guide that could be easily accessed by all members of the team or even from folks outside of the curriculum team. So it's been about 8 or 9 months since I started working on this style guide, and I'm really just now coming to the tail end of this project. We're starting to do our final reviews on this first version. And I've been thinking about what went well, what didn't go well, what I would do differently if I could, and I wanted to share some of that information with you. And what I have are just sort of 5 key tips for anyone who is looking to build their own style guide. And I hope that someone out there finds this talk helpful. The first tip that I have, if you are a lone writer, or if you're just the only person managing this project, is that it's very important to know which direction to start heading before you work on your style guide. Having a plan and knowing exactly what the style guide needs is key. One way to do that is to start with a content gap analysis. Essentially, you want to look through your documentation, look for the inconsistencies, look for the problem areas, and then check your default style guide for guidance. And if that guidance does not exist, then you can add it to your style guide. Now, if you don't have a default style guide, maybe you just joined a team and you found out they don't even have one, that's fine. You can still do this, go through the documentation, and then just note any problem areas, and that could be the basis for your style guide. And you can note any differences for discussion with your teammates. When you're doing this content gap analysis, there are 3 key areas I recommend focusing on. And those are structure, style and formatting, and terminology. When I say structure, I essentially mean layout and document design. So does your documentation have a consistent style and appearance? Or does it tend to vary? So for example, do some of your how-to guides have certain elements and others don't? Keep in mind, this is something that you might be able to address down the line by creating some templates for your organization. Next is style and formatting. First thing to look at is whether or not your writers are using a consistent voice and tone when they write documentation. Is everyone following brand voice guidelines if you have them, or does everyone sort of write in their own voice or write as they see fit? Text formatting, are you noticing that sometimes terms are bolded and sometimes they're not? For word choice, you may find that your documentation uses a lot of passive voice, and maybe you think it would be best to put it all into active voice, for example. And code examples, are they formatted? Are they readable? Is everyone following best practices for whatever language your team works with? And this is just a very short list. There's a lot more to think about here, but I just wanted to give you some examples here. And then the last area is terminology. So are writers using product names correctly and consistently? Are they spelled correctly? Are they capitalized correctly? And then for terms to use and avoid, you may, as you are going through your documentation, find some terms that you don't think that writers should be using. Maybe you can think of better, more appropriate alternatives. So structure, style and formatting, terminology is a great place to start. So look at those key areas as you go through your documentation. And what you'll probably end up having is a nice long list of all those content areas, and that can be the foundation for your style guide. The second tip that I have is don't reinvent the wheel if you don't have to. If you're doing this on your own, it is perfectly fine to use resources, to use tips, to use shortcuts, to make going from planning to writing to publishing a bit quicker, a bit smoother. It is perfectly fine to stand on the shoulders of giants. One way to sort of help you get from, planning to publishing a bit quicker is to use templates. They are great. They help you to save time. They're a great way to help you get started, and they can be modified as needed to fit your team's needs. At last year's Write the Docs conference, I learned about the Good Docs project, and they actually have a really great style guide template that I use for our style guide. If you've never heard of the Good Docs project, the goal of the project is to improve open source software documentation by providing high quality templates and writing instructions to the open source community and beyond. The style guide template that I'm talking about today was created by Alyssa Rock, who serves on the project steering committee of the Good Docs project. This is a great template to use whether you already have a default style guide and you want to create something customized, something a bit smaller, which is what we did, or maybe you don't have a style guide at all and you want to, again, sort of get yourself up and running. This is a great template to use. There are some sections in there for a glossary of preferred terms, a nice table, and you can fill in those elements as you go. There's also a section around inclusive language, how to write for accessible needs. And there's some boilerplate language that you can use in there as well, and I highly recommend adding that to your style guide. There are also topic types and templates that you can use, and there are some links to the templates that the Good Docs project provided. On this slide, I do have a shortened link to the style guide template, and it's rb.gy/KDBUXU. Of course, I highly recommend reaching out to a member of the Good Docs project to get access to the template. As I said before, I use this for our style guide. It was a great way to help to save time. It's just really nice to have something that you can build from rather than sort of starting from a blank document. So again, whether you are using a default style guide or not, I highly recommend using this template. Or just in general, do a Google search, look for some style guide templates, and if you find one that you think will best fit your team and your organization's needs, do that. But don't be afraid to sort of cut corners, especially if you're doing it all on your own. The third tip that I have is to get that team buy-in for your style guide as soon as possible. Don't try to do it all on your own, have it be a very you focused project, and then start trying to bring in folks from the outside. Start involving them as soon as you think that you might want to create a style guide for your team. One thing you can do to help get that buy-in from your team is to present the results of your content gap analysis with your team members. So you can share that list of ideas with the developers that you work with product owners and managers, other stakeholders, of course, other technical writers, and other technical editors if you have some at your organization. So point out the areas where you found your documentation to be a bit inconsistent and why that needs to be included in your style guide. When you do this initial outreach with these folks, a great question to ask them is there anything I can add to the style guide that would help you write or create consistent technical content? Reason why this question is great is because, one, it lets your team members know that you value their contributions, you value what they have to say, and that you want to create a style guide that's helpful to them and, of course, always helpful for your users in the long run. Secondly, this could also be a great way to get some ideas that you hadn't thought of as well. Maybe they have a really great suggestion. So I used this question when I was reaching out to the developers that I work with, and I just found that it was received very positively, and I did, get some ideas from them that I hadn't considered myself. Part of getting that buy-in from your team, one thing you can do is to hold regular planning meetings with relevant folks who need to be involved. These planning meetings can be nice and focused and give you an opportunity to do deep dives into the content of your style guide. So you can have a meeting that's very focused on terminology, so sort of building out that glossary and figuring out what terms to use and avoid. Or you could do something that's focused on voice and tones. Maybe you can get some folks from marketing involved and try to figure out how you can maybe revise your documentation to fit your brand voice guidelines. Or if you don't have any, try to figure out what voice and tone do we want to use in our documentation. A benefit of holding these regular planning meetings too is that you can receive iterative feedback as you develop your style guide. So rather, again, than waiting until the end, get that feedback, get those suggestions early on. A third benefit too is that if something changes while you're developing your style guide, maybe a new product is being introduced at your company, you can sort of include that information where needed in your style guide and sort of get all of that in there. So interviewing folks, telling them what you want to add to your style guide, showing them how your style guide can help, and having those planning meetings is a great way to get that buy-in from your team. The fourth tip that I have is to build your style guide with tools that you already have. And this is a lesson I learned while working on a different but somehow still related project. And that was building a handbook for our team. We'd never had one before, and it occurred to us last year that we needed one. So we built it. And when we built this initial version, we built it with Google Docs. Now, as a team, we don't use Google Docs at all, really. We work almost exclusively in Git. So what happened is that no one really ever accessed the handbook that much. It wasn't updated a lot. And at least for me, it was hard to keep track of revisions to find out, when something changed and why it changed. So I thought that maybe it would be best to get the handbook out of Google Docs and into a tool that we know and use very well. And of all the tools that we could have picked, I thought that maybe ViewPress might be best. And again, ViewPress is the tool that we use for our documentation. This turned out to be a great decision. It became much quicker and easier to update and edit the handbook as needed. For example, during some of our team meetings, we may decide that we need to make some change to some part of the process. getting right in there and updating it was a breeze, and it was much quicker than doing it in Google Docs, at least for us. And it was also easier to keep track of revisions that we make. If you work with Git, you know that when you make a change to some code or to documentation, you can always write a commit message that essentially says, what changed and why it changed. So that was really helpful for us. And then also moving it to ViewPress meant the handbook was in an accessible location. It was in a Git repository. So overall, it turned out to be a great decision. So when it came time to think about where to put the style guide and what to use to build it, it seemed pretty clear to me that ViewPress was the way to go. And furthermore, it would be great to add it to our team handbook because it was already sort of the centralized location for all of our team knowledge. So lists of tools that we use, details about our process, our curriculum development philosophy. So I added the style guide to that too. And as we are, getting ready again to do our final reviews on the style guide, it's great because everyone knows exactly where to go to see that draft of the style guide. So if you can, try to build your style guide with tools that are familiar to you, that you already have. It'll definitely help to streamline implementation because, again, I'm trying to help you go from planning to writing to publishing a bit quicker. And then it may also help to get that team buy-in, especially from folks maybe higher up the chain of command. It's a tool you already know how to use. You already have the license for it, possibly. Hopefully those points will, get those folks to be more likely to say yes to building your style guide and give you that approval. The last tip that I have is that building your style guide is going to take longer than you think, and you need to plan accordingly. I did not. I initially thought that building this style guide would take maybe 3 to 4 months to do. It's actually been 8 or 9 months and counting. Like I said, we're still finishing it up. So it's still an ongoing project. And for all I know, we may, not get this done until it's been a year or more. Who knows? But I didn't really plan very well. I didn't consider all the things that I'd have to do when building the style guide. 2 things that I really didn't consider were who needs to be involved in building the style guide, and then also what my workload was. Now, when I say who needs to be involved, depending on your organization, there may be multiple departments who need to have a hand in helping you build a style guide for your documentation, and that includes marketing, maybe some folks in UX UI, software developers or engineers, legal, especially if your style guide is something that will be visible to the public, an external facing style guide. And then you may need to get IT involved to help you get that style guide up and running. And of course, as I mentioned, other technical writers and editors. So there are a lot of moving parts. There are a lot of folks need to be involved. So you want to, like I said, bring them in earlier into the process. You also need to consider your workload. Don't be afraid to overestimate how long you think it'll take to do your style guide. You may think that you can get it done in 6 months. It might take longer than that. So when you're pitching this idea to your manager or to other stakeholders, see if you can ask for, a little bit longer than that. So if you think it'll take 6 months, see if you can ask for 8 or 9, or see if you can ask for a year. Especially if you are a lone writer who supports multiple teams, or you constantly have multiple projects going on in the background. For me, there would be days when I thought I had the entire day to work on the style guide, but work came through that was a higher priority, so I had to shift my attention to that work, and the style guide remained untouched. So think about your workload, give yourself some padding, give yourself some breathing room, some space to get the work done in case something changes, like a high priority project comes up. So if I could, make one more final point in this presentation, it's that building a style guide on your own is not impossible. It's definitely doable. There are just a few key things that you need to remember. One is that you do need to be proactive. Get out there and get that buy-in from your team. Show them what your style guide can be. Show them what it can do for your team, but then ultimately what it can do for your users, because they're going to benefit from all of this hard work that you're doing to help create consistent technical content. So do your research, point out the areas of inconsistency, reach out to folks who are higher up the chain and get other folks involved as needed. You do need to be resourceful if you can. So try to build the style guide with tools in your toolbox. So whatever you're using now, see if you can use it to build your style guide. And then also try to use style guide templates if you can, because they're a great way to help you get started and can be modified to fit your team's needs. And then lastly, be kind to yourself, especially now because we are still in a pandemic. So I would say it's really important to give yourself some grace, some space, some room to breathe. So reach out to help when you need it. If you find that there are a lot of projects coming at you all at once, but you really want to stay on track to meet your style guide, planning goals, reach out to folks for your team, keep them aware of your progress, and ask for contributions. If you're someone who maybe uses Trello at your organization, see if you can create a board and then add your team members to that board so they can see exactly how you're progressing with your style guide. Do remember, too, that Rome wasn't built in a day. Give yourself plenty of time to plan, write, and publish your style guide. This is a list of some resources that I found to be helpful while working on my style guide. Again, I have a link to the style guide template that the Good Docs project put together. Write the Docs in their documentation guide. There is some information about building style guides. And then Google also has some really great technical writing resources. I want to thank everyone for their time today. I really do hope that this talk helps someone. If you'd like to chat more about style guides or you have some questions, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. Again, my handle is @itsDeannaT. Again, thanks so much. Enjoy the rest of the conference, and everyone, please stay safe.
So people are flocking in, eager to see what you have to say next. So our first question, might as well get started, is from Jennifer. Can you say more about how you chose the Google Guide as your baseline resource?
So, when I joined the team, they were already using that, and they've been using it for quite some time. And like I said, I was teaching English before this, so I was very new to the field. So it was really sort of like, we're already using Google Style Guide. It seems really comprehensive. Let's just roll with it and see how we feel. So, and like I said, it did, worked out very well for us, like I said, for about a year and a half or so.
No, for sure. Sarah has a question. Did you evaluate the word list from Google in terms of how well it fit your users? And again, I think this comes down to like how well it fit for you. So I think she's talking about her company here. The users for MathWorks products are typically scientists and engineers who are not computer scientists. So she's saying she could imagine that depending on the audience, you might actually want to choose a different variant of a word.
Yeah, we did, because like I said, for us, we teach students how to code. So some of the words in that word list we use a lot, and they're not, in that at all. So we really did have to sort of think, like, do we want to sort of change the, maybe we don't like the spelling here. Maybe there's a way that some of the developers have been using it for quite some time and there's just a preference there. So it is sort of a matter of looking at it and saying, yes, we agree with this. No, we don't agree with that. And then going from there.
Perfect. Wendy's wondering if you consider localization issues in your style guide.
So we don't for now. Like I said, we're based in Cleveland. We're mostly based in the Midwest for now. So, most of the students coming in, they're here, they're local. That's not to say that it's something that we shouldn't consider, but for now, we haven't really had a chance to consider it much. But I'm thinking as we start to expand a little bit, it's definitely something that will want to address.
For sure. Lisa has a question, and I can kind of feel the pain in it. She says, I've watched companies create a style guide and then have people stray away from it, often creating their own set of exceptions elsewhere. Any recommendations for keeping the herd of cats together?
Yeah. So the tool that's really helped me in that regard is a tool called Veil. Maybe some folks have heard of it. Essentially, it's a linter, and it helps you to keep it helps you with your grammar, your style, your spelling. So I implemented Veil as a linter for our documentation, and you can create rules like you need to spell this way, don't use this terminology. You do need to use an Oxford comma. So that's one of the best ways to help to, keep our writing consistent. Having that sort of those automated rules really helps there. And then two, for me, in our process, I do more of the copy editing and a bit of the content editing as well. So if I do see that someone's starting to stray a little bit, that's sort of where I come in. And then if I have any questions, I can reach out to the original author of that content.
Perfect. Brooke was wondering, how often do you review your style guide and ensure it stays up to date?
Yeah. So like I said, we just finished this first version, and shortly after that, we did a bit of a team review just to look at it and have some discussions about, how does it look right now? How do we feel about it? Just sort of thinking ahead for me, I'm in the opinion of, just reviewing our style guide during our sprint retrospectives or during sprint reviews. So maybe, someone will bring up, hey, I saw a lot of this inconsistency when I was reviewing this document. Well, that would be a great time to go into our style guide and try to update that guidance right away. So because we're moving very fast and we're producing a lot of content, it seems that, having more regular reviews would work best for us.
Mm-hmm. So we've had a couple questions about, so I'm just kind of trying to conglomerate them into one,
Mm-hmm.
where people are saying, well, you're a lone writer, but who else is using it, right? And so maybe
Mm-hmm.
you've got other guidelines like marketing or company style standards. So you being kind of the person to do it, well, you could talk about who else is using it and how
Mm-hmm.
many other people's input you have to take into account?
Mm-hmm. So this is our curriculum style guide. So it's just for writing and building our curriculum. So it's myself, and then it's the curriculum developers that I work with. We're the ones who are primarily using this style guide. As far as marketing goes, they do have their own style of writing, and that's separate from ours. For our marketing tone, it's very upbeat. There's a lot of exclamation points. It's just a little bit different from the way we want to write our curriculum. So there's some differences there. And then as far as who to get input from, do just talk to marketing because they have great perspectives. They can provide some input around brand voice, brand guidelines. And then also talking to our instructors too to see if they have any, feedback for what to put in our style guide as well.
Yeah, perfect. And we've had a couple of questions too about how you figure out what the scope of the style guide is. So
Mm-hmm.
some examples in the chat are maximum number of steps, maybe
Mm-hmm.
images, UI, screenshots, GIFs, videos,
Mm-hmm.
all sorts of options. So how do you kind of narrow that down into a set of guidelines without trying to list every single possible
Mm-hmm.
thing?
Well, that's where having sort of those regular planning meetings comes into play. What I did is I had a conversation. It was just in Slack, but with a lot of the curriculum developers that I work with. And I said, hey, we need some guidelines around screenshots, videos. What does everyone think? And then we just had a conversation and we just sort of came to an agreement that, at least for us, we try to minimize the amount of screenshots that we use because we're making changes to our curriculum so much. But having a very focused conversation, writing down those guidelines and then everyone coming to an agreement is what we did there.
Great. Going through the questions. Bianca's wondering, what are some things you wish you had done differently or prepared better for at the beginning of this project, knowing what you do now?
I think the biggest one, like I said, is bringing everyone from the team in like from day one. Because for me, like I said, I thought it was a very me focused project. So I did all of the writing and the planning and all the things myself. And then at the end, I tried to bring everyone in. And oh my gosh, I have such great ideas, such great suggestions. If I had brought folks in earlier as well, I might have been able to delegate the work. So instead of me writing everything, I could say, hey, developer A, if you have some time, can you take on this section or this task? So I would definitely say like not trying to shoulder it all myself and just, bringing folks in, letting them take on some of the work. That's probably the biggest one.
Yeah, for sure. Victoria's wondering, I know that one of your slides mentioned inclusive language, but
Mhm.
what was the process like to sort of address that and incorporate that into the rest of the style guide?
So I was inspired to add that guidance to our style guide from I think Alexandra White. She gave her talk last year about
That's a great
inclusive
talk.
language and accessibility, and I was like, oh my God, there's so much out there that I didn't know about. So I really sort of went through our documentation and noticed just some examples of some language that we were using that wasn't exactly that inclusive. So I was really looking through our documentation, finding those areas, and then again, reaching out to the developers that I work with and having that conversation and then coming to an agreement on, okay, we don't want to use this kind of language. And then documenting that immediately in our style guide, just in the form of a table with the, the language that you shouldn't use, and then some more inclusive, more preferred examples.
Perfect. And one more question,
Mm-hmm.
which could be a little contentious, but maybe you can give a good refutation for it.
Okay.
What are some reasons folks choose not to have style guides?
Why would you not want to have a style guide, essentially?
Yeah.
I guess if you really want to give, I mean, maybe if you really want to give your writers some flexibility to write as they see fit, maybe you just don't have the time or the resources right now, especially if maybe you're a startup and you're just trying to get up and running. So you don't really have the time or the resources to devote to that yet. So maybe, okay, no style guide. Let's just go ahead with it now. And then perhaps see if our voice and our, tone or our word choice preferences will develop over time. That's the best argument I can give there. I think every company should have a style guide.
Yeah, I think it was pretty clear from your talk that you'd think that it was
Yeah.
worth your time, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you so much, Deanna. It was so great to listen to this talk. We've got a style guide channel in Slack that gets its fair amount of enthusiasm, and I think
Hmm.
there was a lot of people were feeling solidarity as lone writers. So I
Hmm.
think that it's nice to come here and not feel so alone if you're in that boat. So
Yeah,
thank you again for
definitely.
these great answers.
For sure. Hope it
Um,
helped out there.
yeah, no, I'm sure it did. Yeah.
Okay.
So just so everybody knows, quick reminders, we've got the job fair running. Lightning talks are open, so you can sign up until 11:20. We're going to take a short break, and we'll see you for the next talk at 10:35. Thank you again, Deanna, and I hope
Thanks,
everybody else has a
everyone.
great day. Take care.
Bye.